Hey guys, Kromandz here. So in today's video I want to talk about why Lords of the Fallen felt so disappointing. I also want to talk about the pros and cons I noticed throughout my playthrough. And so far I've only completed the game once, where I played a agility dagger build. So this review will also come from someone who only played a melee build. This video also contains spoilers, so if you don't want to see that, then I suggest you click away. The story in this game didn't really catch me. I did like the idea of this defeated god idea, which now corrupts men around the world. But other than that, I didn't really get invested in the story. And one thing I also found odd was when you cleansed beacons around the world and got back to the main hub, none of the NPCs would react to your actions and had no new dialogue options, so the world just felt very empty. There were a few characters that followed you along on your adventure, like there was the merchant and this guy with a weird hand. And I mean, those were the only two characters that seemed somewhat interesting, but other than that, there wasn't really anything else. The environment and atmosphere of this game is really beautiful. You can definitely see the developers have used the Unreal Engine 5 to its fullest potential. The amount of detail is insane, and I remember the first time I got to the top of Skyridge Bridge and looked over the horizon, I was like, damn, this is a beautiful game. And while I was standing on that bridge, I also wanted to see how the Umbral world looked like. And the Umbral world is basically a layer on top of the current world, and in order to get into that world, you can either rift into it, or if you die, you also get ported into it. And once you're inside that world, it really feels like you stepped into the realm of death. And the tone and the darkness is insane. And even the music is so creepy once you're in that world. You can hear baby crying, and you see skeletons in the distance. And I really feel like they nailed that part. Even though Lords of the Fallen is a very beautiful game, once you start digging just a little bit deeper, you start to uncover all the flaws with this game. And this is also something I will talk about later in this video. I really wish I would have liked the exploration in this game. At first it seemed fine going into the Umbral world, solving puzzles and exploring, but once you got further into the game, it just became stale very quickly. You were mostly fighting the same annoying enemies over and over, and I think that's the reason why it didn't feel rewarding, more like a sigh of relief once you found those items and upgrades lying on the floor. I remember I was like, finally, I'm done with this annoying area where zombies are just coming from everywhere and you have to deal with them over and over. I personally hoped that the exploration would have been fun, but I just never really got to enjoy it. The class fantasy and the different kind of builds you can choose at the start is what you would come to expect. The developers here didn't really do anything new and risky, so you basically have your knight, your barbarian, your rogue, your rangers, your different kind of spellcasters, and even the guy with the same stats across the board. This is fine, I just wish the developers would try something new and different and not just copy the formula we already know from From Software games. The upgrading system in this game is okay, nothing really mind-blowing. In the world you can find your classic materials, which then can be used to upgrade your weapon to +10. I just personally wish there was other materials that would buff your status effect if you, for example, were going a bleed build on your dagger and could make it do more bleed damage. But it seems like there's only one upgrade material. One thing they also implemented is a socket system to your weapons, and at first I thought it was a nice touch, but I quickly realized that there was no depth to the system and all the upgrades were just generic and boring. And as you can see, we have all these runes which increase physical damage while two-handing, increase physical damage, reduce weapon weight, charge attacks deal increased damage, and most of them just really increase damage. But there are a few interesting ones, like this one for example, which lowers a weapon's weight and stat requirement to 0. And to be honest, the developers should just have added more of these interesting ones instead of these generic ones that just increase damage. When you equip the sockets, it doesn't even show you what difference it does to your weapon. All it shows is just text. Here I really feel like they could have added sockets not only to your weapons but also your armor. It would have been a nice touch if you could have added cool and unique passives like armor had in Elden Ring. For example, the white mask, when blood loss occurs, it slightly raises your attack power. The lamp which you carry throughout the world also had a socketing system, and I did like the few passives you could equip. I was just hoping for more, to be honest. And here you have this issue again, which you see throughout the whole game, is that they choose to add these systems that could be fun, but instead they just make them generic and boring, and they don't really add a lot of depth to them. When it comes to enemies in this game, I don't really have a lot of positive things to say about them, and I'll explain you why. In the beginning of the game actually feels very good, like you're fighting new enemies, you're progressing through the game, and once you get to the second area, which is the swamp I believe, you're also fighting new enemies and you're learning new attack patterns, but once you get past the swamp, that's when you start seeing the flaws of the game. You quickly realize that once you get into a new area, you're fighting the same reskin mobs. Like, you have no idea how many times I've been fighting zombies, I've been fighting dogs, I've been fighting invisible archer guys, I've been fighting big guys with two-handed weapons, and most of them, they have the same attack pattern. I just wish that the developers would have expanded a bit and added more enemies whenever you got into a new area, so the game feels more fun when you progress through the game and also feels more exciting. And I mean, it says a lot when I enjoyed the swamp area more than other areas because of enemy variety. Usually in games, these are my least favorite areas. Additionally, I don't know what the developers were thinking when it came to enemy placement. And what I mean by that is that when you went through an area, basically behind every corner there was an enemy ready to backstab you in the ass. And it was just so frustrating, like when you played the game for long periods of time. And it just felt like, honestly, just felt like Blighttown 2.0, like through the whole fucking game. Another thing that was annoying with enemy placement is that they really seem to enjoy putting big enemies inside tight areas. And I mean, those encounters are fine once in a while, but there was just too many of these encounters and it got old very quickly. I mean, you were rolling into objects and getting stuck on weird surfaces, and it just felt like, hey, let's put a big guy inside this area to make the game feel hard, but it was just annoying, and to me it's just bad level design. One thing I also found frustrating with the enemies in this game was that the pull range was simply too big. Like, for example, you could be standing on one floor and then there could be a ranged mob beneath you, and you could pull that mob and it would then shoot its projectiles on your floor, and you couldn't do anything about it because you would have to go all the way down and kill it in order for it to stop. And also, one issue I had with enemy projectiles was once I took cover behind a wall and I saw the projectile flying towards me and it flew right through the wall. And sometimes it also wouldn't, so you were never sure when you were safe behind a wall. When it comes to enemies inside the Umbra world, at first I really liked it because you were always wondering what's lingering inside the world. And when you step into the world, you also know you only have one life. And basically, the longer you stay in the Umbral world, the enemies will get more aggressive and start chasing you down. But once you progress through the game, you quickly realize yet again that the enemies and the variety inside the Umbral world are just the same throughout the whole game. And then the Umbral world kind of just becomes very stale and boring. Like, you didn't have that type of excitement that you had first time you step into it. You just know already what's there. And I just wish that the developers would have added new enemies depending on what area you're in, so the game would feel refreshing and not annoying. Every time I stepped into the Underworld, I was like, oh, not again. Now I have to fight these zombies from everywhere. And I just feel like the Underworld could have had so much potential, but I just feel like the developers wasted it here. One thing I also encountered numerous times was when an item was locked behind a gate or a fence, and the only way to get through it was that you had to use the lamp to face through the gate. And once you wanted to get back out, there was enemies blocking the way, and now you would find yourself in this awkward position trying to get out, and they were like, you just couldn't do it. And then you forcefully had to rift into the Umbra world in order to get out of that awkward situation. And it was small things like these that added up and made the whole experience less joyful, in my opinion. When it comes to combat in this game, there were a few times where it actually felt fun. Like, there was one move with the fist weapons where you could do this spin to win move, which I call it. And I would use it a lot where there was a huge mob of zombies and I would just run up to them and like spin. And that felt very fun to pull off. I also liked that the game had so many different abilities and spells. So if you're a spellcaster, you would have a lot of options to choose from. I even think it was mentioned that all the spells the bosses were using, you would be able to use later on in the game. But most of the times the combat would feel very floaty. For example, when you would hit an enemy, you just really didn't feel that impact of hitting them. And also when you parried their attacks, I didn't really like this sound of fairy dust when parrying. Like, it didn't really catch on to me. I would have liked, sparkles coming out from your blade when you parry, and the sound of blades and camera shake, I just didn't feel that impact and satisfaction, when you parry like you do in other games. When it comes to rolling in this game, there were also times when you would press roll and it would just roll in a completely different direction that you pressed. Like, there were times when I targeted an enemy and mid-roll I would do like a 180 and roll into their attack, and it just felt very awkward in those situations. So sometimes the roll could feel a bit unreliable. And the same thing goes for retargeting. Like, it didn't always respond. Like, how can I say this? Sometimes when there was a lot of enemies, it wouldn't always necessarily focus on the enemy nearest to you, and it was like a bit hard to get the perfect target. And sometimes on a boss, you would also not be able to retarget at all. Like, there was times where I pressed the button multiple times and it just didn't respond and retarget the boss. Like, a perfect example is the first beacon boss. When he goes underwater and comes up again, it was just so hard to get the focus back on him. Another thing I also experienced while I was fighting bosses or enemies was that when you die the first time and get knocked into the Umbral world, you would be stuck in this animation, and sometimes the enemies or bosses could like charge attack you, and you would still get hit even though you were stuck in an animation and couldn't do anything. But luckily it didn't happen that often, so it wasn't such a big issue, but still something I feel like they should fix. Furthermore, the attack animations of weapons in this game was also a bit lacking. And what I mean by that is that if you were using daggers, basically all the daggers across the board had the same attack animation. And I just wish that the developers would have added, daggers with different type of attack animation, so you would be like, oh, I really like this dagger and it really fits the playstyle I want to use. And I also wish when you finally got your poison off or your bleed, that the sound design would have been a little bit better, or at least the animation. Like, most of the times you just couldn't see when you applied the debuff on the enemy or boss. And like here, like I don't know, I shouldn't compare this game with Elden Ring, but in Elden Ring, when you get that bleed off, it just feels so fucking good. And I just wish I would have seen more of that in this game as well. So boss fights for me in these type of games are very important, besides combat. And in this game there were a few cool boss fights, but there was most of the other boss fights I didn't really feel invested, and they just seemed a bit bland and forgettable. But on the other hand, one thing I did feel that was pretty cool was when you died on a boss fight and got ported into the Umbral world, it would kind of change the environment and change the fight a bit. For example, there are these like parasites floating in the air, and you can basically use your lamp and explode these parasites, which then staggers the boss. And I felt like that was kind of a cool idea, like to change the environment once you die on a boss fight. But then you have the same issue as you have throughout this whole game, is that you have all these cool ideas which the development team doesn't expand on. Like, I think the only thing I saw on boss fights were these parasites. Like, they could have implemented other cool mechanics with the Umbral world to make the boss fights more interesting. If you love ads on boss fights, then you're really gonna love this game. But Jesus Christ, like, there were so many mini bosses with ads and a few main bosses as well. And to be honest, they was just so annoying. And most of the time I was just ignoring the ads and trying to do damage to the bosses instead. I just felt like it was a cheap trick to make the bosses feel harder than they really were. And instead I just wanted them to make the fights more intriguing and harder, to be honest. But overall, the bosses felt really forgettable, and most of the attacks were fairly easy to dodge once you got the hang of it. Like, I really didn't get hard stuck on one boss. So yeah, I really feel like I really missed like that, like hard stuck on a boss kind of thing where you have to rethink the way you play, and once you kill the boss it feels so rewarding, and I didn't really see it in this game. So what do I think about Lords of the Fallen overall? Like, Lords of the Fallen is a very beautiful game and has a lot of cool ideas, but once you start digging just a little bit deeper, the game just feels forgettable and disappointing. If I had to give this game a rating, I would give it a 6 out of 10. I just feel the developers wasted a lot of potential and should have expanded on their ideas, taken more risks. The game quickly became more of an annoyance than fun to play. You're fighting the same reskin mobs, fighting zombies over and over, pulling aggro from mobs you couldn't see. And there were a few cool boss fights, but nothing that really blew me away. So if you're having doubts whether or not you should play this game, I wouldn't really recommend it. I would probably just wait for it to go on like a huge sale. And to be honest, if you're looking for another Souls-like experience, I would just recommend Lies of P. Like, I had a ton of fun playing that game. Like, there the boss fights are more memorable and more fun to learn, and the combat just feels way better. But yeah, these are the reasons why I thought Lords of the Fallen was so disappointing. I hope you liked my review, and thank you so much for watching.